Did Jesus go to hell? Ask that in your Bible study and you're going to get one of two answers. A nervous no or a vague maybe. And both of them read past the most explosive thing that Peter ever wrote only 3 days before the cross and resurrection. Let's talk about what actually happened. But first we need some context. Let's go all the way back to 701 BC. The Assyrian Empire sends a man to stand outside the walls of Jerusalem. His title was the Rabshakeh. He was the chief herald, and his job wasn't to negotiate, it was to read a decree. He would stand at the gate and shout in Hebrew, not the diplomatic language, Hebrew, so every person on the wall could hear him, and his message was simple. The war is over, and here are the terms. Now hold on to that image, because 1 Peter 3:9 tells us that Christ did something between the cross and resurrection that maps onto the same ancient protocol. But there's one big difference. The Rabshakeh would stand outside the wall shouting in, but Jesus walks right inside the gates. This is what Peter wrote. Between the crucifixion and resurrection, the risen Christ descended to this cosmic prison, and this is where rebel angels were being held in chains since the flood. He stood right there in front of them, and he made a proclamation. The Greek word Peter uses here is kerusso, and that's not an accident. It's a herald word. It's a decree word. It's not evangelizo. That means to preach good news, to offer salvation. Peter had that word available, and he didn't use it. He intentionally chose the same word that a royal messenger would use when he was reading a verdict to a conquered city. Think about that a minute. This isn't an altar call. This is a king walking into conquered territory and pronouncing a verdict. And we've gotten this wrong in so many Easter sermons and so many Bible studies and so many stories because we treat it like it's Jesus preaching to a bunch of dead people in hell. We make this text about human souls getting one more shot at salvation, but that's not what's happening here. So stick with me because we're going to bring out the text to prove it. What Jesus did in 1 Peter 3:9 follows an ancient conquest ritual, step by step. This was a protocol that every person in the Roman Empire would have recognized. Today we're going to look at the Greek words that Peter chose and why they rule out a second chance reading. Then we're going to walk through the ancient warfare protocol that Peter's audience would have already known. And we're going to see that this passage isn't about dead people getting another chance. It's about the risen Christ conducting a military operation in enemy territory. So let's get into it. Here's the passage. 1 Peter 3:18-20. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah. There are 4 Greek words in that passage that blow the traditional reading apart. The first word is pneumasin, and it means spirits. When the New Testament's talking about dead humans, it uses the word psyche, which means souls. We still use that word today, psychology. It's the inner life of a human being. But Peter didn't write psyche, he wrote pneuma. And in Jewish and early Christian terminology, when you said spirits without a qualifier, you weren't talking about people. You're talking about non-human beings, angels, cosmic entities. Peter's audience heard pneumasin and they didn't think about their dead grandma. They thought about the watchers, the rebel angels from Genesis 6 who left their station, took human wives, and they were in prison before the flood. If you watch my other videos on the Watchers of the Nephilim, you know the backstory. If you haven't, then I'll link them in the description. But here's the short version. These are rebel divine beings, not dead humans. Okay, so here's the second word, phylake. That means prison. It's the same word used for jail cell in Acts chapter 5. The same word for the cosmic holding cell where these rebel angels have been chained in darkness since before the flood. These are non-human beings in a cosmic lockup. Here's word number 3, ekkurtsein. This is the one that kills the second chance reading. I started this video with the Rabshakeh at the walls of Jerusalem, the herald reading a decree. That's kerusso. When a king wins a war, he doesn't send a pastor to the prison camp to invite the enemy to lunch. He sends a herald with a scroll and a royal seal. The herald walks in, he unrolls a decree, and he reads it. That's not a conversation, that's a verdict. Peter had evangelizo available, but he didn't use it. He uses the herald word, kerusso. Now word number 4 is perithos. He went. That's a journey verb. It's not a metaphor. Jesus traveled. And the same word shows up in verse 22, who has gone into heaven. The same verb is used for 2 different journeys. One's going down and one's headed up. 2 different stops on the same victory tour. Put these 4 together and this is what Peter wrote. Christ, in his risen spiritual state, journeyed to the cosmic prison where non-human rebel spirits are held, and he heralded a royal announcement to them. That's not a second chance. That's a sentencing. But here's my question. Why does he go to prison? Why does the king himself walk into the dungeon? The answer is buried in how ancient empires actually conducted warfare. Let's look at what I'm talking about. In the ancient Near East, when you won a battle, that was only step one. What happened after the battle was what established the victory. And it followed a pattern. This was the protocol. Every empire from Assyria to Rome used some version of this. Step 1. Breach the stronghold. The victor will go into the enemy's fortified position. You don't claim territory that you haven't physically entered. The entry is the proof. In 1 Peter 3:19, Christ goes, Perutheus. He travels to the prison. He enters enemy territory, not as a prisoner, but as the one who just won the war at the cross. Step 2 is you confront the defeated power face to face. This is the part that's so easy to miss. When ancient kings conquered a city, one of the most devastating things they did was they would go into the enemy's temple and they would seize the statue of all of their gods. Scholars would call this god napping. The Elamites stole the statue of Marduk from Babylon, Sennacherib smashed the gods of Babylon, the Hittites carried off the patron deity of the conquered cities. This wasn't just looting, this was theological warfare. When you carried off the enemy's god, you proved that your God was stronger. You proved that your enemy's God has either been defeated or he tapped out. But Christ inverts this. He don't need to carry the watchers anywhere. They're already in chains. They were defeated at the flood. They've been sitting in darkness for thousands of years. And Jesus walks into the prison, not to drag them out, but to stand over them. Christ proves he's God by walking into the deepest enemy stronghold in the cosmos, and he don't need to do anything except speak. Step 3. Issue the decree. This is the Caruso moment. After the conquest, the Assyrian kings would take this victory stela in the territory that they had taken. They would take these carved stones that would bear the king's name, his titles, and account of the victory. These weren't monuments. These were legal decrees. They showed ownership. The king's name on a stone in your territory meant that it wasn't your territory anymore. Sargon of Akkad did it. Tiglath-Pileser III did it at Gaza. Ashardon did it when he showed 2 conquered kings on leashes going right through their faces. When a king carved his name in your land, he was saying, I own this now. But Christ doesn't carve a stone. He speaks. His proclamation in the prison of the watchers is the steel. His voice in the darkness is that inscription. The decree of victory read out loud in the one place the enemy thought was secure. Philippians 2 says it this way, At the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. 3 territories right there. The name spoken in all 3. The prison that Jesus went to, that's the under the earth part, and the knees bow there too. Step 4, ascend to the throne. Peter gave us this in verse 22. Christ has gone into the heaven and is at the right hand of the throne of God with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. Same journey verb, perithis. Perithis down, perithis up. The descent and the ascent are not 2 separate events. They're 2 legs of the same campaign. Down to the prison and up to the throne. Every spiritual power between the floor and the ceiling is now under his feet. Step 5. Distribute the war spoils. This is where Ephesians 4 picks it up. Paul quotes Psalm 68 here, the oldest warrior hymn in the Bible. When he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. In a Roman triumph, the conquering general paraded through the streets with the enemy's treasure on wagons pulled behind him. Then he would distribute the spoils to his soldiers. Paul said that Christ did the same thing when he gives out the gifts of the Spirit. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, tongues, prophecy, healing. The gifts of the Spirit aren't church programs, they're war spoils. Now let's zoom out. The watchers have been sitting in that prison since before the flood. And the reason that they're there is because they tried to stop exactly what just happened. Go back to Genesis 3:15. God told the serpent that a seed was coming, a human descendant who would crush his head. The watchers' move in Genesis 6 was a counterstrike. Corrupt the bloodline, erase the image of God from humanity, disqualify the Messiah before he can even arrive. It's the Terminator strategy. Where do you think Skynet got this idea from? If every human carries Watcher DNA, the promised deliverer can never qualify. And God's response was surgical. He preserved Noah, one family, clean line. He sent the flood to purge corruption, and then he locked the Watchers in prison to await their judgment. They've been waiting ever since, in the dark, no contact, no updates, just the knowledge that the verdict's coming. And that verdict already exists. Psalm 82, God stands in the divine council. He looks at the rebellious spiritual beings who were given authority over the nations and they abuse it. And he says, you are gods, but you would die like men. The sentence was handed down, but it wasn't executed. Not yet. And then someone walks into the prison. And I'm not talking about Enoch. Enoch came once before, according to 1 Enoch 12. God sent Enoch to the watchers to say, you have no peace. The watchers begged Enoch to write a petition for mercy. He wrote it. He brought it to God, and the petition was denied. Enoch delivered the preliminary charge. Psalm 82 issued the sentence. Christ walks in and executes it. Enoch was the process server. Christ is the judge. This is what the 1 Corinthians 2:8 pattern looks like when we lay it over the watchers. They tried to stop the seed. The rebellion triggered the flood. The flood preserved Noah. Noah's line produced Abraham. Abraham's line produced David. David's line produced Jesus. Jesus died. Jesus rose. And Jesus walked into the prison of the very beings who tried to make his birth impossible. And he said, I'm here. You tried to breed me out of existence, but I'm standing in your cell. You corrupted a whole civilization to prevent this moment. That civilization's gone, but I'm not. You tried to prevent the plan, but what you did was trigger the very chain of events that made the plan unstoppable. That's the intelligence error at its most devastating. The Watchers didn't just fail to stop the Messiah. They handed God the reason to preserve the bloodline that produced him. Every Easter I get asked the question, did Jesus go to hell? Some's going to say, no, that was just paradise. It's finished. The cross is sufficient. And they're right about the sufficiency of the cross. But they're not right about Peter's text. Peter says that Christ went somewhere and did something between the cross and the throne. Ignoring that doesn't protect the gospel, it shrinks it. And then there's Augustine's answer, the one that most of our Bible studies probably footnote. Augustine said that Christ preached through Noah's mouth to the people before the flood, and those people are now spirits in prison because they rejected the warning. Okay, Augustine's brilliant, but on this text, I believe he's wrong. His reading takes pneumata, spirits, and he makes them human souls. It's a different Greek word. It takes in prison and it makes it about their current location instead of the Watcher tradition Peter's audience already knew. And it takes he went, which is a literal journey verb, and he turns it into a metaphor. But that same verb, 3 verses later, clearly means a journey to heaven. You can't have the same word be a metaphor in verse 19 and be literal in verse 22. The Western Church flattened this passage because it lost the background. When you don't know about the Watchers, when you don't know about ancient conquest protocol, then you're just left grasping. And you land on dead humans in hell because you don't have another category. But Peter had the category, his audience had the category, and now you have it too. And once you have it, there's a pattern that appears that runs from Genesis all the way to Revelation. After the flood, the Watchers' corruption is purged, the principalities are bound, Noah is preserved, but then Babel. Humanity is scattered, the nations are divided, handed over to rebel spiritual powers. We see that in Deuteronomy 32:8 and 9. God steps back from the nations and he chooses one family, Abraham. In you, all the families on the earth shall be blessed. That's the promise. The nations are going to come back. Now watch the same sequence repeat. After the cross, the principalities are publicly shamed. Believers are saved. Christ descends and reads the decree to the imprisoned rebels. The old administration is officially served. And then Pentecost. Tongues of fire, every language in the room. The nations that were scattered at Babel, they start coming home in a single afternoon. The flood dealt with the Watcher corruption. The cross dealt with the powers behind it. And Babel scattered the nations under rebel authority. Pentecost gathers them back together under the true king. Abraham carried the promise that one day nations are going to be reclaimed. When the Spirit was poured out in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost, that's the day that the reclamation began. And the hinge between these two sequences, the moment the first administration ends and the second launches, it's Peter 3:19. Christ is standing in the prison of the rebel Watchers and he's reading them the decree. That's not a footnote. That's the gospel with the volume turned up. The seed they tried to stop walked into their cell and he said it to their faces. Then he ascended. Then he poured out the Spirit and the nations started coming home. The war is over. The king won. And Pentecost proves it. If this opened up 1 Peter in a way that you haven't heard before, hit that subscribe button. I make videos like this every week. What the Bible actually says when we read it in its original context. If you want deep dive with the sources and citations, I got a companion piece for you on Substack, links in the description. Next time, we're going to talk about what happened after the prison. The extraction, Ephesians chapter 4. He led captivity captive. That's a whole different video. I'll see you then. God bless you.